Millions of people all over the world have been marching against Israel's genocide. What happens now to that movement, which wasn't just against the genocide, of course, it was against Israel's occupation, apartheid, dispossession of the Palestinian people, which goes back generations. At the absolute forefront in Britain has been, of course, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which has mobilized vast numbers of people. Ben Jamal here, the leader of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. But look, the demonization we have seen, the turning of the world upside down, that those who oppose genocide are hateful, dangerous extremists, has been quite something. And there is an attempt to, well, we're seeing the imposition of even more stringent anti-protest laws. What happens next, though? Because now there's this, everyone should go home. There's peace, is there not? This is the whole narrative. Let's talk about that. Ben, firstly, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you as well, Owen. And it's the day before a demonstration, so my easy answer is I'm very busy, but I'm delighted to have the time to speak to you.
Well, exactly. It was obviously very important to talk about that demonstration. So this demonstration is taking place on the 11th of October. Even if people are watching after, this still matters. But if people are watching before, go and protest, first of all. But why? So this is the whole claim now. It's like, well, this just shows this wasn't about peace. You got your peace, did you not? That's the whole kind of narrative. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, and I've been asked this question quite a bit in the last 2 days, sometimes in a hostile way, by journalists saying, well, there's no reason for you to protest anymore. But also genuinely people asking, well, is the demonstration going ahead and what next? And let me just say this, because first of all, how do we respond to this ceasefire? So people, and we expect a very, very large demonstration tomorrow, maybe one of the biggest we've had. And I think people will be coming, first of all, sharing with the Palestinian people their sense of relief. And even, and I'm going to caveat this, but even some degree of joy. We saw people dancing on the streets of Khan Yunis, that we may have a ceasefire. And that means that, as one Palestinian put it, people have the capacity to start to think about tomorrow and the day after. Maybe very soon Palestinian parents will feel I don't any longer need to write the name of my children on their arm in case they get blown to smithereens, and there will be something recognizable that can be buried. But we also share their trepidation, rooted in the knowledge that Israel has violated every single ceasefire agreement that it has ever signed. And I'm hearing this morning already, despite the agreement, the shelling of Palestinians who are trying to walk back towards their homes. But also, we are sharing with the Palestinian people, and this gets to the root of the question of why would you carry on demonstrating, that we know this sort of so-called peace plan of Donald Trump's is nothing of the sort. Because it's not a pathway to an enduring peace, because it's not dealing with the root causes of violence. It has nothing to say about the ongoing occupation, nothing to say about what is happening right now in the West Bank and has been happening for decades, nothing to say about the system of apartheid that exists all over historic Palestine. And our message consistently has been that we've been protesting to try to bring an end to a genocide, but on the basis of a message that the foundations of this genocide are 77 years of racist oppression of the Palestinian people. And our campaign, which will continue, is for that to end, for the system of apartheid to be dismantled, for the occupation to be ended, and for the Palestinian people to be able to enjoy their rights of self-determination and the fundamental right for those who've been expelled and their descendants, including every single one of my family, to be able to return to the land from which their families were expelled in 1948. I
mean, this demonization of these protests, and it's really important to note that these vast protests are a real cross-section of British society. They include people who are Christian, Muslim, and Jewish. There's always Jewish protesters who are there, proudly holding banners such as Jews Against Genocide, very much visibly and proudly Jewish, as well as non-believers and so on. But just one example, I mean, some might just say, why bring this person up because they're such a troll, but they're a columnist. They're a journalist at the Mail on Sunday, which is the biggest Sunday newspaper in the country. And that's Dan Hodges, who says the demonstrations will continue regardless of a peace agreement. The reason they'll continue is because they were never about peace and always about intimidating Jews. Just for context, just to show the sort of thing you can say in the British media, he was asked, for example, about the civilian population of Gaza, including hundreds of thousands of children, can just go to hell, right? And he said, yes, basically. This is previous things he said. When he said, opposing all reconstruction, someone said that's collective punishment. He said, fine. He went. Someone said, I feel sorry for the ordinary Palestinians. They've been cynically used by Hamas and Iran. He said, I've got to be honest, my sympathy for, in quotes, ordinary Palestinians is pretty low this morning. But it's just an example, isn't it? It's just the world turned on its head. People can say anything about Palestinians in the Western media, however depraved, however racist. And they're claiming that the real hateful, dangerous extremists are people who are opposed to terrible, terrible crimes being committed by the West.
Yeah, and look, this sort of demonization that begins in the first place of an attempt to demonize and delegitimize Palestinians and their struggle. In its most pernicious form, the narrative that we're not really a real people, we're a fake people. We've constructed an identity just because we hate Israelis and Jewish people. And you'll see that replicated across the Israeli political establishment. But look, this demonization that follows on from that of those acting in solidarity has always existed. Very early on in these demonstrations, it was across the political establishment, the media, the attempt to call this hate marches, anti-Semites, terrorist sympathizers. You remember all of this leading up to the demonstration in November. Suella Braverman saying, these people, even suggesting that waving a Palestinian flag could be an anti-Semitic act. And then in a sense, although that hasn't gone away, because that has not succeeded in stopping people marching, and because the reality that these are, as you say, demonstrations from people from all areas of society, young and old, mostly orderly and peaceful demonstrations, many, many Jewish people marching, because the reality of that is very, very clear. It's lost its power. In fact, we had a bizarre situation just a few weeks ago where, in an attempt to justify the illegitimate prescription of Palestine action, we had the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, saying, no, we have a problem with groups like Palestine Action. We have absolutely no problem with those protesting in these marches, which are orderly and peaceful. So in a sense, she was trying to sort of contrast our marches with a group that she wanted to prescribe. Now suddenly, and what's most grotesque about this is the utilization, and look, let's describe it for what it is, the weaponization of this grotesque racist attack on a synagogue in Manchester, to utilize that again to demonize the movement and to say there is some linkage. And I would say this, those who rightly condemn the racist violence we saw in Manchester 2 weeks ago have no moral foundation on which to do so if they are supportive of Israel's genocide, supportive of Israel's system of apartheid, and utilizing the kind of narratives about Palestinians that you've just described. You have no consistency. And from the start, we have been very clear. What are the principles on which we're marching? They are principles that say we stand against what Israel is doing, not because we hate Jewish people or hate Israelis, but because we hate apartheid. We hate racist systems of oppression. And we think standing up to racism anywhere involves standing up to racism and racist systems of oppression everywhere. That's why we've been marching and will continue to protest until that system of racist oppression is fully dismantled.
I mean, it really does speak, doesn't it, to the total dehumanization of the Palestinian people. I mean, 13 Hiroshimas worth of explosives have been dropped in an area the size of East London. It's been wiped from the face of the earth more comprehensively than any territory in human history. Countless, literally uncounted numbers of people being exterminated, vast numbers of them children. a live stream genocide, all the war crimes you could possibly think of, a consensus of genocide scholars saying it's genocide, the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity, a genocide obviously case at the International Court of Justice, and the idea is oh, why would you still protest? But as if one of the great crimes of our time hasn't just been facilitated by Western governments, notwithstanding the historic oppression of the Palestinian people. It'd be, it's just the way anti-Palestinian dehumanization is just so normalized that could in any way, the idea people would need to protest be portrayed as anything other than the most obviously normal thing you could possibly do in these circumstances.
Yeah, and look, we saw this. I mean, I'm going to take this back a bit. One of the narratives that's been resurrected in the past few days, because we are approaching the 2-year anniversary of this genocide beginning, is the narrative that PSC began organizing the first march on October the 7th and protested on October the 9th. And the narrative is, well, why would you do that when nothing had happened to Palestinians by then? And the reality that ignores is, on October the 7th, over 500 Palestinians had already been slaughtered by Israel. It began its military response immediately. We'd already had statements of genocidal intent. Benjamin Netanyahu said on October the 7th, we are going to target each and every corner of the Gaza Strip. There will be, we will turn it into a deserted island. Everything that they've done. Yoav Gallant was already saying we're cutting off all supplies, all food, all water.
Human animals.
We're dealing with human animals. So we were already seeing, and so the sort of message is, why would you be organizing a protest about that?
Yeah.
It was of course, that what happened on October the 6th and the 5th and the 4th, that's normalized. That the fact that the Palestinian people, we hear the narrative that Hamas broke a ceasefire. There was no ceasefire. Israel killed 250 Palestinians in the West Bank between January the 1st and October the 6th, 2023, including dozens of children. That's
40
so
children.
In a sense, Palestinians are supposed to accept that, the normal daily grind of occupation. And you cannot sustain an occupation or a system of apartheid upon a people who legitimately want to resist the imposition of that system without brutal violence. You've just been out there. You've seen the reality of what that brutal violence looks like. But all of that is normalized. And what we're seeing right now, or what we're about to see, is going to be an attempt, because we may be at a point where the mass death of Palestinians through starvation might be prevented because aid might be able to get in. So people are not going to be confronted with scenes of starving children every day. Maybe this ceasefire will hold and we will not have a daily toll of massacres. But there will be an attempt then across the political establishment to say everything's back to normal. Why are you talking to us about not selling arms to Israel? Why are you telling us that we should be employing sanctions, ignoring the reality of the ongoing occupation? July 2024, the ICJ ruled on what we already knew. It's entirely illegal, but said that there's a responsibility on every state not to take a single action that aids and abets his occupation, which means comprehensive sanctions, a full arms embargo. That situation has not altered. So the responsibilities of our government are exactly the same as they were last week, exactly the same as they were before this genocide began. What we've seen through this genocide is what happens when you grant a state impunity for carrying out a system of racist oppression that, as you rightly say, is fundamentally has to be built on dehumanizing those you're oppressing. You have to stop regarding as human beings. That's now widespread across Israeli society. 2 months ago, there was an opinion poll that should have been shocking, barely registered. 82% of Israeli Jews supported the idea of expelling every Palestinian. 2 million people ethnically cleansed from Gaza. 56% said that Palestinian citizens of Israel should be expelled. 47%, nearly half of Israeli Jews, said they thought Israel had the right to slaughter every Palestinian in the towns and cities that it occupied. Now think about the level of dehumanization that must exist and have been normalized across the society for people to be quite comfortable to say, yeah, we should slaughter all of them.
I mean, one of the things which you kind of alluded to there as well is that after these, heinous live streamed war crimes on a daily basis, there's been an unprecedented shift against Israel and Western public opinion, with the vast majority of people in Britain, for example, being very clear that Israel has committed war crimes, that an arms embargo should be imposed, that Benjamin Netanyahu should be arrested for war crimes and crimes against humanity. But now, there will be a determined attempt to kind of roll that back, because obviously the fear, the rational fear of Israel's cheerleaders is that will materialize into proper pressure to end all British and Western complicity in Israel's subjugation of the Palestinian people. So one of the important things of this movement is to not let that happen, to not let the truth about what Israel has done with Western complicity and facilitation be erased.
No, that's absolutely right. And look, Donald Trump acknowledged that in what he said this week. He said that he had pressured Netanyahu to accept the deal by saying to him, you can't fight the entire world. So what he was saying is you are completely isolated now. Netanyahu, several weeks ago, made his speech, the so-called Sparta speech, where he said they're going to sanction us. They're all going to sanction us, but we're ready to fight that. We'll become Sparta, So Israel has become completely isolated. And look, we know what has motivated so many people to become engaged in solidarity actions, to march, to protest, has been what they've seen of the horror of this genocide. And our task, we know when that's not visible to people every day, there is a risk that their attention shifts. But what we have to do is remind people of the realities I've just talked about, that all of this is built on a foundation of a system of racist oppression that still exists, that we are enabling, that we are complicit in, our government, our public bodies, our companies and corporations. So we have to keep the foot on the pedal of all of the attempts to impose sanctions and processes of boycott and divestment on Israel, in the same way that happened globally against South African apartheid. And look, Israel, across the Israeli political establishment, is a desire, as some Israeli ministers have put it, we need to complete the job. We have to complete the Nakba. In other words, we have not succeeded in erasing the Palestinian people. We need to expel all of those we can, kill those we can't expel. That's been halted at the moment. But if Israel gets another chance, if the world allows it once again to continue to sustain, then it's not unrealistic to say it will turn again to genocide if it is not held accountable for the genocide it's already committed. So these things are fundamental, and that's the task for everyone. That's what I want people to bring tomorrow to the streets of London. But then we need the sustained body of campaigning, which we've already got in place. 20 local councils have now, under pressure from their local community, said they're going to divest from Israeli companies. The co-op has taken Israeli goods off its shelf. There's been a 17% decline in the import of Israeli goods. There's a conversation now about Israel being kicked out of Eurozone, maybe out of UEFA. All of these levers of pressure we have to keep up, because this will not end. This is rooted in a fundamental injustice founded on notions of racist supremacy. And I'll say one final thing. There's a reason why the Israeli government has invited Tommy Robinson to Israel, because they share the same ideology of ethno-nationalism. And this is, people have got to realize, we're not just fighting here for the rights of the Palestinian people. We're fighting for what type of world we want to inhabit.
Amen. And just one other thing there on, in terms of what happens next. I mean, Israel, by preventing, for example, reconstruction in Gaza, that would mean the mass deaths of huge numbers of people, which is obviously itself genocidal. Just one final thing. It's about the anti-protest laws that we're seeing already. Before the genocide began, we'd already had a battery of, under New Labour, terrorism legislation, which was used against protesters, as people predicted it would be. And then, under the Tories Policing Act, for example, all again suffocating the ability of people to protest. Now we've of course had the prescription of Palestine Action, and now they're proposing even more anti-protest laws. Just what's going on, and why is this so important?
This is really fundamental what they're proposing to do. So what we're anticipating, there's a crime and policing bill going through Parliament at the moment. It's in the Lords again next Thursday. What we think the government is going to do is stick down a new amendment to that gives the police additional powers to stop protests on the grounds of cumulative disruption. Now, the police are already trying to use these powers, we think, illegally. This is going to give them primary legislation to back their ability to do it. What does that mean? Well, it could have extraordinary implications. It could mean that if you've organised a protest at Downing Street, and then you want to organise another one, that the police could say, well, that's a cumulative disruption. You are disturbing that community, the community around Whitehall. So we have the power now to say you can't protest because you've already protested once. We have had a proposal for us to march from Whitehall to the Israeli embassy turned down by the police on the grounds that there is a synagogue that we pass within 15 minutes of on the route, and that's a cumulative disruption to that synagogue. Now, part of our answer was we haven't marched on this route for over a year. They said it doesn't matter. You have been disturbing other people within the Jewish community across London. So this is an argument potentially for saying if you've marched once on an issue in London, you could potentially say, well, you've had your protest. And if you think about this, why do people march? Why do we protest? Because we are trying to build a body of pressure. But that requires sustained protests. Somebody reminded me the other day, the suffragettes achieved their first victory really in 1918, where there was the first moves to properly recognizing women's right to suffrage. They began protesting in 1906, 12 years of sustained protest. Imagine if there'd been a law saying, you've already marched once, you've told us you want the vote, you can't march again. So this has really, really serious implications. The police already have more than enough powers. They've imposed draconian restrictions on us. A few weeks ago, we had a condition imposed an hour before a protest that we couldn't use any amplified equipment. They tried to stop us using megaphones. And the rationale was, President Herzog was speaking to Chatham House, it will disturb this particular community. I said, well, this is the community I'm here to disturb. I want to disturb President Herzog. I want him to hear me. And I want to disturb the people who've invited a war criminal to speak to them. So we are in a really, really serious situation. There's a whole body of civil liberty groups that are sounding the alarm on this. This law has to be stopped. And we have to push back against all of the restrictive legislation that is already in existence.
Amen to that. Well, this is why it's so important if people are listening to this before the protest on the 11th of October. We'll put the description, the link to the details of the protest. So make sure you tell people, spread the word, and people should be aware that you have protested against one of the great crimes of our age, and it has been instrumental in transforming. But this is what's been interesting. Actually, it's been in conjunction with the Palestinian journalists of Gaza, the bravest journalists the world has ever seen, who've been exterminated by showing the world what's happened. And there's been this incredible kind of, movement, which is joining those Palestinian journalists and showing what they've done and the people on the streets. And that together has shifted Western public opinion, and pro-Israel cheerleaders know that, and they're panicking about it. That's why we have to build the pressure now, not just to end the genocide, but also, of course, the subjugation of the Palestinian people full stop. So please like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts and your comments. Share the video. All of that's important to get the word out. But cheers, Ben. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Owen.